Kazuo Ishiguro's book, The Remains of the Day, won Britain's top literary award, the Booker Prize. It received rave reviews from the critics and was turned into an award-winning film starring Anthony Hopkins. Born in Japan but raised in London from the time of his childhood, Ishiguro began a career as a social worker before writing his first book. His fourth novel, The Unconsoled, examines the mixed blessings of celebrity from the point of view of a celebrated pianist as he readies for a concert. I'm very pleased to have Kazuo Ishiguro on this program this evening. Welcome. Great to have you here.
Oh, it's very nice to be here.
You know, do you read reviews?
Sometimes.
Oh.
Yeah, well, of course. Yes, I do, yes. Whenever I can find them, yes.
Yeah. They are praising this book, but there also seem to be, some of the words that come out are puzzled and frustrated. It's difficult. What's in your head as you're writing this? I mean, do you mean to be difficult? Do you mean to be uncompromising for the reader? Do you mean to be what?
I don't mean deliberately to be difficult. You know, I think it's just bad manners to just deliberately be difficult. If you're talking to somebody, you have to try and say things as clearly as possible. But having said that, if what you're trying to say requires a certain odd way of saying it, then, well, that's the best you can do. And I think it's fair that these reviews, if you like, warn people who perhaps
don't expect an easy read.
Yeah, it's not an easy read. I wouldn't take it to the beach.
But describe the book in your own terms. You know?
Well, it's essentially a book. Well, I guess one of the reasons it's not an easy read is because it's kind of involved with anxiety. It's some people have said it's like a long anxiety dream.
Yeah.
And I am fascinated by this idea of an anxiety dream, particularly like an anxiety about a performance that is coming up. I kind of feel that many of us are going through life with a sense that at some point there is this very important performance that's coming up. We're going to get pushed up there on the stage and all these people are going to judge us. And we should be preparing for it, but in the meantime, there are all these things to be getting on in life, and you have to look after the kids and do the shopping, and every now and again you stop and you realize you're not ready.
I get this performance anxiety every night.
Well, you're in a special position.
No, but go ahead. This is a question of a concert pianist, but it is the idea of anxiety about being on stage.
Well, I guess it's my kind of version.
Not on stage so much, but on stage as a metaphor for important events in your life.
I suppose it's the anxiety about the important event in your life. I mean, it may just be my version of the old kind of Judgment Day idea that there is some point to which all our lives are consciously or unconsciously moving, and at some point we're going to have to give an account of what we've been doing. But I'm not a religious person myself, and maybe I find it easier to use metaphors like performance anxiety, that we're all moving towards this big performance.
This is such an easy question to ask, but I mean, there's a sense that, is there any of Ishiguro in Writer? Are you here in Writer, the pianist, the principal character?
Well, only in a very glancing sense. I find it very difficult to write about any character unless it is in some sense based on some aspect of myself. And I suppose, I mean, this is rather a disturbing thing, but I can only really work up an interest in characters who come out of the less attractive aspects of myself. But that's not to say, I don't write in that kind of autobiographical mode. And certainly this isn't a book about me. He's a concert pianist, I'm an author, but I mean, that's not
Well, what's the unattractive aspect of you that's in him?
Well, that character, rather like the character in my last book, The Remains of the Day, I mean, finds it very difficult to give himself to other people, to open up his emotions. He's defensive to the point of, I think, almost being not human. But at the same time...
Not human?
Well, yes. I mean, there comes a point when, as with both of these characters, I think an obsession with control and restraint perhaps takes these people over the line into being people who are quite destructive.
Does writing about it make you less that way? Examining it and writing about it?
I don't know. It probably doesn't. I mean, I don't think there is a practical value in this sense.
Well, how about a cathartic value?
There might be a kind of cathartic value. I think a lot of writers like to write about certain areas that touch on maybe some kind of misalignment, some kind of wound deep in themselves. And this isn't because there's a practical benefit from doing so. It's just that if you know you've got some kind of messy wound somewhere that's never going to heal, you still want to kind of play about with it. And I think many writers move towards certain themes, certain ideas for that reason.
Tell me about the relationship between Sophie and Boris, to writer.
Well, this is one of the odd things about the book. At first, they're just strangers he encounters in the city. But gradually, he starts to get vague memories about them. And he starts to think, well, maybe they're not strangers. Maybe, you know, Sophie is in fact my wife. Maybe Boris is my son. And they certainly behave towards him as though he is, you know, the father stroke husband. And so he accepts this and goes along with it. I mean, this points to one of the odd ways in which the book works. It's not like a conventional story where you hear about somebody's life from, you know, youth to old age. Rather, you have a model where a protagonist walks into some kind of strange world, and he bumps into people who are aspects of himself from the past or aspects of important relationships he's had.
There's a familiarity and an unreality about his experience, an unknowingness.
Well, rather in the way dreams are sometimes, maybe, that, you know, it's peopled by people from the past.
Did you, I mean, I want to ask you about this, did you have anything to, you didn't have anything, we talked about this before, so when I sat down with you, you didn't have anything to do with the selection of this cover. This
No,
is a
I
John
didn't.
Bowman painting.
Mm-hmm. No, but I think
You
it's
like
a fine cover, yeah.
Yeah. It was selected by the publishers, I guess, right?
Yes, it was, but the colours are rather good.
The
colours.
Oh, the colors, yeah. You have in your life been, in a sense, when you go to Japan, you didn't go until you were, what, 30, in your 30s?
I was 35 when I returned to Japan for the first time.
And you left it when you were, what?
5.
5. And so 30 years later, you go back. And because you'd had some success, you were instantly viewed as an authority on Japan.
Yes, particularly in Britain, in the West, I was. I mean, not in Japan.
No, but in the West. I mean, you were asked to comment on all things Japan.
Yeah, this is a problem in England, and maybe it happens here. I don't know. Perhaps people are slightly more sophisticated, but because somebody has a Japanese face, there is this assumption that yes, you can comment on anything to do with Japan. And
from culture to commerce.
Yeah. Well, indeed, I was. You know, I had to turn down the most ridiculous requests, like to comment on the trade relations between the U.S. and Japan and so on. And why would I know about that? I mean, it's rather a terrifying idea that, you know, something as superficial as your face or your name can turn you into an authority in the eyes of the media sometimes.
When you look at the success of Remains of the Day, the book and the movie, most of your books, including this one especially, do not necessarily lend themselves to a movie. Remains of the Day was made by Merchant Ivory into a very successful and much admired movie. Were you surprised?
Yes, I was in a way, because every time I write a book, in a sense, I'm trying to write an unfilmable book. Now, this might sound perverse, particularly from a professional point of view, but as a novelist, I feel that if I'm offering an experience that can be more or less replicated in the cinema or in front of a television screen, then it's not really worthwhile, because it's so much easier to go to the cinema. You know, so it's so much better fun. You know.
So what do you do to make sure it's not easily adaptable to another medium?
I'm not just trying to make it not adaptable. I'm trying to find the territory that only a novel can offer. You know, I want to say, if you want this kind of experience, you can only get it in fiction. It's not some kind of, it's not like a film on paper. And for this reason, I suppose I'm trying to create worlds that are very interior. I'm trying to do things with reality and time and space in this book that perhaps would not be easily done in film. Nevertheless, you see, the trouble for me is that there are all these very talented filmmakers around, and every time I think I've done an unfilmable book, which is what I believed that Remains of the Day, because it was all interior monologue. You know, you get people like James Ivory and brilliant actors like Anthony Hopkins coming along, and they somehow turn all those words inside a man's head into images.
How different was their interpretation from yours?
I thought, in essence, they were the essence was was the same. I think the main kind of point, if you like, that came out of the book and out of the film were the same. I think the moods, the atmospheres were different, and I've got used to this idea that there are two things called the remains of the day. I mean, there's something called James Ivory's The Remains of the Day, which is the distinct and separate work from my Remains of the Day, and I admire his The Remains of the Day, but I think I don't think of it like a translation of my book as I would
two
regard
separate
the French
works of art, so to speak.
I think that's how you have to look at it, because I think the movie has its strengths and weaknesses, and my book has strengths and weaknesses.
Then has anybody offered to buy this?
Not so far, but I mean, now
well,
it's being
so you
published
must be a
in the
happy
United
man.
States.
What?
Well, as I say, the business
You've
side
succeeded,
of me...
maybe.
Maybe, yeah. Well, I have this kind of cat and mouse game with the film thing,
Yeah.
The business side of me makes me wish that, somebody will make a big movie out of it.
Not much sex, not much plot.
There's a bit of sex between two very old people, which perhaps isn't the right sort of sex for the movies, but I find that idea, sex between two people who love each other but are decrepit, touching and sad and moving. And I think it's perhaps the first sex scene I've actually published.
I think it is, yeah. And was this something you wanted to, or was the subject of the relationship between two older people just presented itself and demanded that there be, a dealing with this?
Yeah, I think the latter. I don't approach my work in terms of saying, well, it's time we had a...
Not so much that, but, clearly in an evolution of a writer or a filmmaker, you go from saying, I'd like to try this, and writing about relationships, whether they be sexual or intellectual, has to do with, the normal evolution exploration of a playwright or a writer. All of us want to do and try different things that perhaps we haven't tried in the past, yes?
Well, that's absolutely right. I think I certainly... There were a number of things I wanted to try for the first time in writing this book, but probably sex wasn't one of them.
Okay, but then what were they? Because that's what I'm getting at.
Well, I wanted to try writing right away from reality, to try and create a world that operated by its own alternative set of laws.
Away from reality.
Yeah. My first three books, although they're interior monologues, basically they're realistic
Grounded
books.
in reality.
Yeah. I wanted here to create a world that operated by different rules altogether. And the other thing, much more simply, I wanted to have a go at the longer novel, because I actually
this
think...
is much longer than anything you've done. This is what, 650, what is it?
It's 530 pages or something like that.
Right.
So I think the longer novel is a different form. I think there's as much difference between the 250-page novel and the 500-page novel as there is between the short story and the shorter novel.
And what's the difference?
Well, I think organically it works in a different way. I think there are many differences, but the most basic one is I think shorter novels, on the whole, tend to just be like one story plus maybe a subplot, whereas the longer form, you're talking about 2, 3, 4 narrative strands that are interlaced and orchestrated together. So it's as different as a sonata to a symphony.
Are you part of a group in Europe, say? That in a sense signal the coming back of the novel or a new appreciation of the novel, or any of that?
Well, I think the novel always seems to be coming back.
I know it is.
It's always
true.
being written
Either
off.
that or it's dying.
Yes,
one
it's
or the
always
other.
dying and then coming back. So, so I don't know.
They have learned seminars on the death of the novel.
Yes, it's been going on for hundreds of years, the death of the novel. But I don't belong to any kind of conscious group. I don't get round a table with bunch of people and plan anything.
Yeah. What are your ambitions then?
Well, as I've got older, before I used to have diverse ambitions. I always wanted to do a bit more kind of work in movies, because I've always been on the fringes of the film world, trying the odd script here and there. And
well, you've tried your hand at...
Yeah, I've tried to write movies, and in fact, James Ivory kind of persuaded me to have a go at writing a screenplay right now. I have to say I'm really struggling with it. It's a very different
original
form.
screenplay or an adaptation?
It's kind of halfway between the two. He had some materials. And, it's a very different form, and but I find the world of movies, fascinating. Not least because I find the whole business world of movies fascinating. So I kind of like to hang around.
What do you find fascinating about it? The business of movies.
Maybe I only find it fascinating because I don't have a real investment in it, But yeah, you see a lot there. You see a lot of people trying to keep some kind of hope alive that their project will get some funding, and you see all these people who are desperately wanting to be celebrities, and you see celebrities who are hounded by fame.
And you see the maturation process of a film taking so many years.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll see this film's coming out in the Christmas 1995, and you talk to the filmmaker and they say, well, we had our first script in 1987.
Well, sometimes it's longer than that, I mean, it's some films seem to be in a gestation period for 20, 30 years.
But back to your ambition. So you used to be interested in exploring film. Are you less so now?
Well, it's something to do with hitting 40. I've suddenly got a little desperate. I realized I had to get down and consolidate the one thing I've been allowed to do, which is to write. I mean, I used to want to be a musician. I wanted to be a filmmaker and a writer. But I'm now kind of sticking to writing because I realize that there's only a limited amount of time left. And me and writing, well, it was never my great passion, but it's what I've been allowed to do. And it's a little like an arranged marriage, I was going after, I wanted to be a rock and roll star first, and I was after all these other things, but life permits you to do something. I was fixed up with writing, and like an arranged marriage.
Well, you fixed up in well, see, but that's what's troubling about that is if you were fixed up in writing rather than you found that writing was where your talent was and where your skill was and where your passion was.
Well, maybe there's a bit of both, But I don't really see all these things being that different. Now, I feel I do have certain things I want to do, and I wouldn't go as far as to say I could do it just as well in a musical form or in the movies. But if somebody said I couldn't write any more books, but I was, for some reason I'd be transformed into a technically competent film director, I feel I could in some way just continue my career.
Sure. Yeah, but I mean, what about taking? I mean, why would you be willing to say? I mean, it seems to me you're saying I've reached 40. I realize that I'm a writer. I mean, and I see this in other people you talk to on this program where, they say, even athletic coaches will say, I realize I'm a lifer, that this is what I do. I'm an athlete, I'm a coach, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a television journalist, because as we grow older, we have all kinds of ambitions from being a Nobel laureate to being president to being, to being a movie star to being a whole range of things. And somehow, I mean, was this a middle-age crisis for you, or was this just a middle-age kind of realization that this is what I am, and I better make the best of this and see how far I can take it?
Yeah, it's more that. It's not a crisis because I mean, if you have to settle on something, I mean, to settle on the idea that you're a novelist isn't so bad. I mean, it doesn't close down a lot of things. You can still have this ambition of being a Nobel Prize winner.
Right.
It's not as though it closes things down, but you see, I came to the conclusion that, you mentioned athletes there, that actually novelists often tend to peak only a few years after athletes. There's a kind of a myth going around that, novelists
get better with age.
Yeah, their prestige I think, peaks when they're about 60 or 70. That's when they get a lot of awards and people are very polite to them.
But their performance peaks when?
I think somewhere around 35 to 45. I mean, this is proven if you actually...
You know what you're saying? That your best work is behind you.
Yeah, I know. This is terrifying. I mean, there are always exceptions. But if you make a list of great classics and then try and find out how old the authors were when they actually wrote
it's scary, isn't it?
Yeah, it's scary. I mean, like Faulkner is a good example. Gets a Nobel Prize in his 60s for work he did in his early 30s.
Yeah. Well, some critics, speaking of that, look at this and they have said, I don't quite get it, and I don't know whether it's great or whether this is an aberration that was worthy but just doesn't cut it. And they mentioned Faulkner as an example of that.
Yeah,
what you consider this an aberration? Do you consider this taking big chances? Do you consider this you've gone off on the limb and maybe, Well,
I felt, I mean, at this point, around the 840 mark, you've got to go for it. There's no point in writing sort of pleasant things that are likely to, almost certain to attract nice reviews. I mean, you've got to go for it if you're going to be ambitious.
Kazuo Ishiguro, Remains of the Day, was his last book made into an award-winning film. Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Wendy Wasserstein is here. Stay with us.